Arnold's parents didn't disappear on an adventure, they abandoned him. And Craig Bartlett spent 9 years documenting what happens to a child raised by grandparents who are losing their minds in a city that's already dead. The show wasn't cancelled because of ratings. It was cancelled because Nickelodeon realized where the story was going, and they couldn't let a children's cartoon end with a boy discovering his parents chose to leave him behind. We have the original scripts. It's worse than you remember. You remember the setup? A fourth grader with a football shaped head living in a boarding house run by his grandparents, city kid problems, school drama, life lessons, the occasional mystery about his missing parents. But you never question why the city looks like that? Hillwood isn't a real place, but it's every dying American city from the 1990s. Craig Bartlett grew up in Seattle and Portland, cities that were rotting from the inside while everyone pretended everything was fine. He watched neighborhoods collapse. He saw families break apart. He documented it in animation and called it a kid's show. Here's what shatters the nostalgia. The Sunset Arms boarding house isn't quirky. It's a last resort. Every tenant is broken in a specific way. Mr. Hyun, a Vietnamese refugee with PTSD who lost his daughter during the fall of Saigon. Oscar, an unemployed grifter whose wife works herself to exhaustion while he pretends to look for jobs. Susie, trapped in a codependent relationship with a man who uses her. These aren't cartoon characters. They're case studies in urban poverty and displacement. And Arnold is the child services forgot about, raised by grandparents who are clearly experiencing dementia. Phil hallucinates constantly. He thinks he's still fighting in World War II. Pookie believes she's various historical figures. They're not eccentric, they're mentally ill, and a 9-year-old boy is responsible for managing their care while also going to school. Notice how Arnold never complains, never asks for help, never tells anyone that his grandparents leave the stove on, wander the streets at night, or forget who he is. That's not maturity. That's what happens to children who learn early that no one is coming to save them. But here's a detail everyone missed. In every establishing shot of the boarding house, there's graffiti on the wall across the street. Same tag. Every episode. 4 letters. DEAD. Most people assumed it was random street art. Adds to the urban aesthetic. It's not random. In Bartlett's original pitch document, archived at the Paley Center, he describes Hillwood as a city in its death throes. The graffiti isn't decoration, it's diagnosis. The entire city is dead. It just hasn't stopped moving yet. Count how many episodes revolve around things closing. The movie theater shuts down. The local store goes out of business. The chocolate factory stops production. Gerald's family business struggles. The neighborhood pool is condemned. Hillwood is dying in real time, and the children are growing up in its corpse. Watch the background crowds, really watch them. The adults are tired, worn down, moving slowly. They have the body language of people who've given up but don't know how to stop. Compare them to the kids who still have energy, still have hope, and you see the show's real theme. What happens to childhood in a place where futures don't exist? Arnold's obsession with helping people isn't kindness, it's desperation. He's trying to save a city that's already gone. Every act of heroism is futile because the problems are systemic, not individual. You can't help Mr. Hyun find his daughter when the government that separated them doesn't care. You can't fix Oscar's unemployment when there are no jobs. You can't save the neighborhood when the economic forces destroying it are invisible and inevitable. But Arnold keeps trying, because if he stops, he has to face what he already knows. His parents aren't coming back. The show told you this in the first episode. Arnold's room, that famous bedroom with the remote controlled skylight and street access, it's not a cool kid's room. It's a space designed for a child who's been told he's temporary. The grandparents put him in the attic, away from the main house, separate, like they knew he'd leave eventually, just like his parents did. And that skylight? That's not whimsy. That's an escape route. Arnold stares at the sky every night, watching for the plane that will bring his parents home. But deep down, he's also planning his own escape. The moment he's old enough, he'll leave too. Just like everyone leaves Hillwood. The city is dying, the adults are broken, and the children are just marking time until they can get out. But that's not even the strange part. Craig Bartlett didn't start his career making children's television. He started making experimental animation in the 1980s, short films about isolation, urban decay, and the violence of poverty. His early work featured claymation figures in empty cityscapes, silent except for ambient street noise. One film, Arnold Escapes from Church, 1988, featured a character with a football shaped head sitting alone in a pew. The film is 4 minutes of a child staring at stained glass while adults pray around him, ignoring his obvious distress. It ends with the child walking out of the church into an empty street and just standing there. Credits roll. No resolution. That character became Hey Arnold. But Bartlett didn't change the core concept. He just added more characters around the lonely child and called it a comedy. In a 1997 interview with Animation World Network, archived but rarely cited, Bartlett said something revealing. Arnold is based on every kid I saw growing up in the city who seemed too mature for their age. You know the ones. They're taking care of younger siblings, running errands for adults, mediating arguments between their parents. They're 9 years old, but they have the eyes of someone much older. The journalist asked what happened to those kids. Bartlett's response: most of them disappeared, moved away, got absorbed into the system. A few made it out okay, but most, I don't know where they ended up. Hey Arnold is Bartlett's attempt to document those disappeared children. Every kid in Arnold's class represents a different survival strategy for growing up in a dying city. Harold, the bully who's actually just hungry and angry because his family is poor. Stinky, neglected to the point of developing backwards. Sid, anxious and paranoid because his home life is unstable. Rhonda, using wealth and status to avoid confronting that money can't save her from the city's decline. And Helga, God, Helga. Helga Pataki is the show's most honest character. She's what Arnold would be if he stopped pretending everything was okay. Her parents are emotionally absent. Bob is a workaholic who verbally abuses her. Miriam is an alcoholic who's checked out completely. Her sister Olga is a successful one, so Helga is functionally invisible in her own home. Her obsession with Arnold isn't romance, it's recognition. She sees that Arnold is surviving the same way she is, by being everything to everyone else while getting nothing in return. She loves him because he's the only person in Hillwood who hasn't given up yet. And she hates him for the same reason, because his hope makes her own hopelessness unbearable. The show played this for comedy, but listen to Helga's internal monologues. The poetry she writes about Arnold. That's not crush material. That's a child clinging to the one person who proves that goodness can exist in Hillwood. In the episode, Helga on the Couch, she sees a psychologist who diagnoses her behavior in clinical terms. The show frames it as Helga being difficult, but rewatch it as an adult. That psychologist is seeing all the signs of childhood trauma: emotional neglect, verbal abuse, parentification, depression, and Helga shuts down because no one has ever asked her how she feels before. That episode aired once. Nickelodeon rarely reran it. Too real. But here's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every adult in Hey Arnold is damaged in a specific way that mirrors real urban poverty. And if you track the backgrounds, the businesses, the architecture, the infrastructure, Hillwood gets worse as the series progresses. Season 1, the city is struggling but functional. Streets are dirty but maintained. Buildings are old but standing. Season 2, more boarded windows, more graffiti. The episode Save the Tree shows developers trying to tear down the last green space. The episode The Pig War shows the neighborhood fragmenting over resources. Season 3, The Decline Accelerates. Harold's Kitty shows the animal shelter overcrowded and underfunded. Phoebe Cheats reveals the school is cutting programs. Curly Snaps has a child having a complete psychological break and no one gets him help. They just lock him in a closet until he calms down. By season 4, Hillwood is visibly collapsing. Streetlights don't work. Buildings are condemned. The episode Married shows what happens when Hillwood's children grow up and stay. They become as broken as their parents, trapped in the same cycles of poverty and dysfunction. And through it all, Arnold keeps trying to help, keeps trying to fix things, keeps trying to believe that one person can make a difference. But the show knows better, because every problem Arnold solves is temporary. He helps Mr. Hune find his daughter, but their reunion is awkward and sad because they're strangers now. He saves the neighborhood from developers, but they'll be back. He helps Susie leave Oscar, but she comes back because she has nowhere else to go. Nothing actually gets better. Arnold just makes it bearable for another day. That's the pattern. Every episode is Arnold trying to perform CPR on a corpse, and we watched it thinking he was succeeding. Here's the detail that connects everything. Arnold's parents, Miles and Stella, are mentioned in almost every season. But notice what we're told about them. They were humanitarian aid workers. They went to San Lorenzo to help people. They disappeared trying to cure a sleeping sickness. They're described as heroes, selfless, noble, the kind of people who abandoned their infant son to save strangers on the other side of the world. But Arnold never asks the obvious question, why did they leave me? Because he already knows the answer. They left because Hillwood was dying and they couldn't save it, so they went somewhere they thought they could make a difference. They chose a cause over their child. They chose anywhere over here. And Phil and Pookie, they don't talk about Miles and Stella much because they're ashamed. Their son abandoned his own child. Their son proved that even family isn't enough to make people stay in a dying city. The boarding house is full of people who stayed when they should have left or left when they should have stayed. And Arnold is growing up learning that love isn't enough. Hope isn't enough. Trying isn't enough. The city wins. Always. And that's when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. In 2002, Craig Bartlett pitched Hey Arnold, the jungle movie, to Nickelodeon. The premise: Arnold finally gets a lead on his parents' location and travels to San Lorenzo to find them. The network greenlit it. Production began. And then, 6 months into development, Nickelodeon killed the project. The official reason: creative differences. The real reason didn't surface until 2012, when leaked production notes appeared on animation forums. A storyboard artist who worked on the film posted them anonymously, along with a note: the network couldn't handle where Craig was taking this. They wanted a happy ending. Craig refused. The leaked documents reveal Bartlett's actual ending for Hey Arnold, and it's devastating. Arnold travels to San Lorenzo and finds a village where his parents worked. He finds evidence they were there, medical supplies, photographs, their journals, but he doesn't find them. Instead, he finds a village elder who tells him the truth. Miles and Stella came to cure the sleeping sickness. They succeeded. They saved the entire village, and then they left, not back to Hillwood, but deeper into the jungle. They'd heard about another village that needed help, and another, and another. They'd spent 9 years moving from crisis to crisis, choosing to save strangers instead of going home to their son. The village elder asks Arnold if he wants to follow them, tells him the trail isn't cold. They could find his parents if they kept going. And Arnold says no, not because he's angry, not because he's hurt, because he finally understands. His parents are addiction addicts. They're addicted to being needed, to being heroes, to being anywhere except Hillwood, where the problems are unsolvable and slow and boring. They're not coming back because coming back means admitting they can't save everything, means confronting that they failed their own child while succeeding with everyone else's. Arnold returns to Hillwood alone. The movie ends with him walking back into the boarding house. Phil asks if he found them. Arnold says, "I found what I needed to find." And then he goes up to his room, looks out his skylight, and the camera holds on his face as he processes that he's an orphan by choice. His parents are alive and simply chose not to come home. Fade to black, credits, no resolution, no reunion, no happy ending. Nickelodeon executives read this ending and panicked. This wasn't a children's movie. This was a meditation on abandonment and the limits of heroism and the devastating reality that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you simply don't, at least not enough. They asked Bartlett to change it, to have Arnold find his parents, to have a reunion, to give the audience closure and hope and the promise that families can be repaired. Bartlett refused. He said, according to the leaked notes, Arnold's story was always about learning to accept that some things can't be fixed. If I give him his parents back, I'm lying about what the show was really about. The network canceled the movie. They cited budget concerns publicly, but the real reason was philosophical. Nickelodeon couldn't air a children's movie where the protagonist's quest ends in the confirmation that his parents abandoned him and aren't coming back. The show was canceled shortly after. No finale, no closure, just gone, like Miles and Stella. But the network's fear of Bartlett's ending reveals what the show had been saying all along. Sometimes the people who leave don't come back. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you're just a child in a dying city surrounded by broken adults, and the best you can do is survive. Now, let's talk about the episodes that never aired. Production records show that Hey Arnold had 5 completed episodes and Nickelodeon refused to broadcast. They're mentioned in crew interviews, in Bartlett's DVD commentaries, in archive production schedules, but they've never been released, not even as deleted scenes. One was called Phil's Last Day. The premise, according to Bartlett, Phil has a health scare and Arnold has to confront that his grandfather is dying. The episode would have dealt explicitly with dementia, mortality, and what happens when your caregivers can't care for you anymore. Another was Arnold Alone, an episode where Arnold spends an entire day by himself because everyone in his life is too busy or too broken to notice him. No dialogue, just ambient city noise and a child moving through empty spaces. Bartlett described it as a tone poem about invisible children. A third was called The Last Sunset. The city tries to tear down the sunset arms to make room for condos. The residents fight back but lose. The episode ends with the building being demolished and everyone scattering to different parts of the city. It was meant to show that even Arnold's small sanctuary isn't permanent. Even home ends. Nickelodeon rejected all 3. Too depressing, too real, too willing to admit that childhood and poverty is trauma, not adventure. But here's what Nickelodeon didn't catch or didn't care about until too late. The episodes that did air were already saying the same things, just quietly, just in the background and subtext. The network thought they were broadcasting a quirky city cartoon. Bartlett thought he was documenting the death of the American urban working class and what it does to the children left behind. Look at the episode Parents' Day. The whole school celebrates parents. Arnold doesn't have any. He brings his grandparents who are clearly confused about where they are and why. Arnold watches his classmates with their functional families and you can see it on his face. He's realizing what he's missing. Not just parents, stability, normalcy, the promise that someone is taking care of things. Or April Fool's Day, where Helga's elaborate prank backfires and she's publicly humiliated. The episode ends with her crying alone in an alley and Arnold finds her. He doesn't say anything inspirational. He just sits with her because he knows that sometimes there's nothing to say. Sometimes the world hurts you and there's no lesson or silver lining. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you while you feel it. These moments are everywhere in Hey Arnold. Little acknowledgments that the show knows what it's really about. That Bartlett was never lying to us. He was just hoping we'd see it. The final episode that aired, Grandpa's Packard, is maybe the most honest the show ever got. Phil's car is stolen. It's the last connection to his youth, to who he was before age and dementia took everything. Arnold helps him find it and they do. But it's been stripped for parts, destroyed, and Phil just accepts it. He says something like, well, that's how things go. That's the show's philosophy in one line. That's how things go. Things break, people leave, cities die, and you keep going anyway because what else are you going to do? Arnold drives a destroyed car home with his grandfather. It barely runs. It's more rust than metal, but they make it back to the boarding house. And Phil says, "Thanks for the help, short man." That's all Arnold ever wanted. Not to save everything, just to help, to matter to someone, to know that his efforts, however futile, were seen, and that's when everything starts to align. Here's what Craig Bartlett was actually documenting: the slow, grinding trauma of growing up poor in America's forgotten cities, and the way children learn to perform emotional labor for the adults who are supposed to be caring for them. Arnold isn't a hero. He's a parentified child. That's the clinical term for kids who become caregivers for their own caregivers, who manage their grandparents' dementia, who mediate conflicts between neighbors, who suppress their own needs because everyone around them is barely holding on. Every adventure Arnold has is actually him doing emotional work that adults should be doing, but can't because they're too damaged by poverty, trauma, and the systemic collapse of their community. When Arnold helps Mr. Hyon find his daughter, he's reuniting a refugee family that the US government separated and forgot about. That's not a child's responsibility. That's immigration services' failure that fell on a 9-year-old's shoulders. When Arnold saves the neighborhood from developers, he's fighting gentrification and economic displacement that requires systemic policy changes, not one kid's intervention, but there are no systemic solutions in Hillwood, just children picking up the pieces of their parents' failures. The show is honest about what this does to Arnold. Watch his face in quiet moments. He's tired. He's so tired. But he can't stop because if he stops, everything falls apart. That's the burden of parentified children. They've been taught that their worth is conditional on their usefulness. And his obsession with his parents? That's not a child wanting a reunion. That's a child trying to understand why he wasn't enough, why they left, what he could have done differently to make them stay. The Jungle movie's canceled ending answers that question: nothing. There was nothing he could have done. His parents didn't leave because of him. They left because they couldn't face what staying required. Being ordinary parents in an ordinary dying city doing the ordinary work of loving a child every day, even when it's not exciting or heroic. Miles and Stella wanted to be saviors. Arnold just wanted parents. And the show is saying that those two things are incompatible. You can't save the world and save your own child. You have to choose. And they chose. So Arnold grew up in a boarding house for broken people in a dying city, raised by grandparents who are losing their minds, surrounded by adults who can barely care for themselves, much less a child. And he learned to make that enough. Because it had to be enough. That's the truth beneath Hey Arnold. Every episode is a child asking, "Am I doing enough?" And the answer is always yes. Not because he's succeeding, but because it's impossible to succeed at what he's been asked to do. You can't save a dying city. You can't fix systemic poverty. You can't make adults who've given up start trying again. But Arnold doesn't know that yet. So he keeps trying, and we watch him try. Episode after episode, year after year. Watch him pour himself into people and problems that can't be saved. Watch him smile through it all because that's what good boys do. Good boys don't complain. Good boys help. Good boys make it easier for everyone around them. Good boys disappear into the needs of others until there's nothing left of themselves. Here's the final piece that reframes everything. In the show's original Bible, the document Bartlett created to pitch the series, there's a note that didn't make it into any episode. It says, Arnold's football-shaped head is symbolic. He's built to be kicked around. That's his function in Hillwood. Everyone uses him and he lets them because he doesn't know he has a choice. Nickelodeon made Bartlett remove that note. Too dark, too honest. But he couldn't remove it from the show itself because every episode proves it true. Arnold's shape isn't random, it's design philosophy. He was built to absorb impact, built to be useful, built to be whatever everyone else needs him to be. And his parents? They're the ultimate proof that being good, being helpful, being useful, none of it makes people stay. You can be perfect and still be abandoned. You can do everything right and still be alone in a dying city with grandparents who forget your name. The show ran for 5 seasons, 100 episodes, 5 years of Arnold trying to save Hillwood. And what changed? Nothing. The city kept dying. The adults kept breaking. Arnold kept helping. And his parents never came home. In 2017, after fans had been begging for 15 years, Nickelodeon finally greenlit the Jungle movie, but with conditions. Bartlett had to give it a happy ending. Arnold had to find his parents. The reunion had to happen, so he did it. He gave them what they wanted. The 2017 movie ends with Arnold finding Miles and Stella. They're sick but alive. They come home. The family reunites, everyone cries, happy ending, closure, and it's a lie. Not because the movie is bad, it's actually beautifully made, but because it contradicts everything the show spent 5 years building towards. The show was about learning to accept what can't be fixed. The movie says actually everything can be fixed if you just try hard enough. The show was about a child learning to survive without the people who were supposed to love him. The movie says actually they loved you all along and now they're back. The show was about confronting that sometimes people leave and don't come back. The movie says actually they were always coming back, you just had to believe hard enough. It's a happy ending built on denying the show's entire thesis. And Bartlett did it because Nickelodeon wouldn't fund the movie otherwise. Because the market doesn't want honest stories about childhood trauma. It wants reassurance that families heal, cities recover, love conquers all. But the show knew better. The show knew that Arnold would grow up and leave Hillwood just like his parents did. Because staying means accepting that you're trapped. And Arnold learned from the best that love means being anywhere except where you're needed most. The 2017 movie gave us closure, but the show gave us truth. And sometimes you have to choose between what feels good and what's honest. Hey Arnold chose honesty until Nickelodeon made it stop. So here's the complete picture. Craig Bartlett didn't make a quirky city cartoon. He made a documentary about urban poverty and childhood trauma and the children who learn to survive in spaces that have given up on them. Every strange detail, the football-shaped head, the boarding house full of broken people, the city that gets visibly worse, the parents who never come home, they all point to the same truth. The show was saying that growing up poor in a dying city is trauma, and children learn to cope by becoming what everyone needs them to be. Caretakers, mediators, fixers. They learn to smile through it. They learn that their needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. They learn that love is conditional on usefulness. And they learn that sometimes the people who are supposed to come back just don't. Not because you weren't enough, but because staying is harder than leaving. And running towards something is easier than facing what you're running from. In a 2018 interview with the AV Club, after the Jungle movie had aired and the happy ending had been delivered, Bartlett said something that nobody seemed to catch. The interviewer asked if the movie ending was what he'd always planned. Bartlett paused for a long time. Then, I gave people what they said they wanted. But the truth is, if Arnold had found his parents in the version I wanted to make, he would have realized he didn't need them anymore. He'd already learned how to survive without them. And that's a different kind of strength. Knowing you can make it on your own, even though it shouldn't be your responsibility. That changes everything. Every lesson Arnold learned about helping people, about being there for others, about hope in hopeless places, all of it was him teaching himself how to survive abandonment. The show wasn't about a good kid making a difference. It was about a traumatized child performing goodness, because he learned that's how you keep people from leaving. We didn't watch a children's cartoon. We watched 9 years of a child processing abandonment and calling it heroism. We watched a boy convince himself that if he helped enough people, fixed enough problems, smiled through enough pain, maybe his parents would come home. Maybe someone would stay. And they didn't, until a network decided they had to for the sake of a happy ending. The question isn't whether Arnold's parents loved him. The question is, why did it take a 9-year-old boy's heroic quest for them to finally choose to come home? What does it say about family when a child has to prove he's worth staying for? And deeper, how many real children are performing Arnold's role right now? How many kids are managing their caregiver's trauma, mediating their neighbors' conflicts, trying to save their dying neighborhoods, all while the adults around them pretend this is normal? We thought we were watching a kid with a weird head helping people in a quirky city. We were watching the documentary Craig Bartlett made about children who learn too early that adults won't save them, that cities die, that people leave, that sometimes the best you can hope for is surviving the night and trying again tomorrow. We thought it was a cartoon about helping. It was a documentary about coping, and we called it entertainment. Maybe that's why we still remember Arnold so clearly, because somewhere inside, we recognized the weight he was carrying, and we learned from him what every forgotten child learns, that being good means being useful, and being useful means never admitting you're tired. The city is still dying, the children are still carrying us, and we're still calling it a cartoon.